to Silvacast, the podcast about all things silviculture. My name is Brad Hutnick.
And I'm Greg Edge.
We're both silviculturists with the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources and your host for today's show.
Brad, I got to tell you something. You're a goat.
Wait. You think I'm the goat? I'm the greatest of all time? I don't even know what to say. Greg, I really appreciate that.
Brad.
The greatest of all time. Wow, yeah, that hits me right here. I'm really touched, Greg.
Brad.
Now, would you mind if I called Andy, our supervisor? I don't know, but he might. I think he'd like to get on this.
Brad, you misunderstood. I said you're a goat. Bah, not a G-O-A-T.
Oh. Hey, what do you mean, goat?
Well, it's no secret that you eat almost anything.
Well, all right, Greg, I'm not as prissy as you are about what I'll eat, but I mean...
Okay, case in point, last week, we're out in the woods walking a logging road, and remember the apple? There was an apple.
Yeah, I think it was a Honeycrisp.
Yeah, and you ate it, but the problem being was this apple was just sitting in a muddy rut of a logging road in the middle of an aspen harvest.
Well, okay, so you've got a more delicate constitution than I do. But in my defense, I wiped it on my shirt first, Greg, so it's an apple.
You didn't know where that apple had been. So I'm just saying.
All right.
You're a goat. In any event, Brad, it turns out that you are not the only goat in the woods these days. More and more, land managers are exploring new and innovative ways to control interfering vegetation. And that could be drones, it could be new herbicides, equipment, you name it. Managers are getting innovative. And today, our guests are Greg Haak and Brooke Hushagen of HaakHagen Goat Grazing. And they have embraced innovation in terms of using goats as a silvicultural tool.
Nice. This should be a great conversation. But before we get to that, just a quick reminder that the end of the year is approaching. If you still need continuing education credits, remember to check out the Silvacast website to learn how to get credits just for listening to Silvacast.
Today's episode of Silvcast is brought to you by the Nelson Paint Company. Since 1940, foresters all over North America have relied on Nelson Paint for tree marking solutions. Nelson Paint manufactures paint designed to withstand the harshest weather conditions in the field, and the NelSpot tree guns have lasted the test of time. Visit nelsonpaint.com to learn more about their products.
Greg and Brooke, welcome to Silvacast. Tell us a little bit about yourselves.
Well, my name is Brooke Hushagen, and my real job is that I work in forest management for Wisconsin DNR. And I have a husband and 3 children, 3 girls, and a goat herd, which you'll hear more about as we move on.
And my name is Greg Haak. For my real job, I work for the Wisconsin DNR. I work at the state game farm where we raise pheasants for public hunting. I also have a wife and 2 children, a son and a daughter. Yeah, it's a little bit about me.
I like the idea, family plus goats, which we don't hear too often. So that's good stuff.
Yeah, and I don't have any goats. So I guess my next question is, how did you both get interested in goats?
Well, for me, I grew up on a dairy farm. And it was the winter of 2015. I was home sick from work, about the only days I've ever missed in my entire career. And I was thinking, I really want to have animals again, and not cows, because cows are big and you can't move them, and I don't want to milk them every day. And I don't know, we just talking at break, Brooke and I, and kind of got the ball rolling about goats and doing a goat grazing business, and kind of just stemmed from there, I guess.
Yeah, kind of like the classic lunch break conversation. I had picked up a couple of goats in, probably 2012, I think it was. Just a couple of pet goats for the family, and my husband and I have a little small acreage in Poinette, which was overrun with buckthorn. So we're like, hey, goats are cute. They're good pets and we can use them hopefully to do some land management. I'd heard a little bit about that. So yeah, lunch break talk turned into having a couple goats and we thought it was a pretty cool idea and we thought we'd give it a go.
Greg, that kind of reminds me of us talking about Silvacast, but I think our version would involve alcohol.
Yeah, it wasn't. Yeah, we won't go there, Brad.
So, for you two, we have kind of I don't know, we always do it on our episodes, and I'm always curious about this stuff, but you're both in natural resources and forestry. And what was the thing that got you into what you're doing right now with the DNR and with goats?
Well, I suppose I've always had a love for outdoors and animals. And like Greg, I also grew up on a dairy farm and realized that cows are a lot more work than goats. We raise meat goats, I guess, so as opposed to dairy goats. So we're not milking our goats. They're strictly for grazing and that. But just got into a career where I could be outside a lot and then kind of drew in always loving to be around animals and animal husbandry and things like that. And goats are, smaller livestock and fun and cute and all those things. So yeah, it was a good kind of marriage between the natural resources management and animal husbandry.
Yeah, and I would say a lot of the same things for me. Just I got my DNR job once I graduated college, where kind of went from dairy farming to pheasant farming. So it was a slight transition, and then enjoy having animals and having our own goats and building our herd from there has been fun.
So I have to admit, so as we start this conversation about goats, I know absolutely nothing about goats. I mean, I've read in preparation for this, but I have to admit, like, I haven't seen goats in the woods. And so this is really like, I'm learning a lot, just kind of getting ready and thinking about this. And I think some of our listeners might be in the same boat. They've only heard about goats and things like this. So what is managed goat grazing or managed grazing with goats for forest management?
So what we do is we'll have the targeted area. We'll set up a fence around it with electric netting. And usually we have a herd of about 40 to 50 goats in a group, and we'll let them in there. They can eat an acre in a couple days. They can eat an acre in a week, just depends how thick the vegetation is. The goal is to defoliate the trees and herbaceous stuff in the pen, where it has to use reserves from the ground to, make new leaves and stress the plant out. So with goats, it's repetitive. It's not a one time. The goats are going to come in, eat everything down like beavers to the ground, and it's not going to grow back. It's going to grow back in 4 to 6 weeks. And usually we like to hit stuff 2 to 3 times in a summer to really stress it out. And sometimes it takes a couple years. It's all dependent on the site. Sometimes it's, there's not exact, it's not 3 years or 5 years or 2 years. You just got to keep after it until it's gone. And usually when it grows back less than the first time. So the first graze might be a week. Second graze is usually 3 to 4 days. And if you do a third graze, it's only a day or two. That's just how it's worked for us.
Yeah, and it's a lot like other types of land management too. It's really landowner objectives based. Some people are hiring us simply to clear a lot. And they said, we want to see what's underneath there. It's just been raspberries and brambles for years, and they wanted to clear it for building a shed. We had some clients that wanted to do that. Some people simply don't want to use herbicides on their properties, so they just want to use the goats. And I know we talk about in the forestry world a lot. It's just another tool in the toolbox. It's not necessarily a magic wand, but it can be used in combination with lots of other tools too.
Greg, you went a little bit into that process, and I'm like Brad. I have seen goat grazing done on some of our managed lands, but I don't know much about it. And I'm just curious, as you were describing that process, are those goats rotated through that site? So you said you put them in a pen on that site? And then do you give them so many acres, and then is that moved around the site over that summer you're describing?
Yep. So it depends on the size. We've fenced up to 6 acres at a time. If it's pretty thin, it's kind of, our pen size is based on time and how much available brush is in there. If it's super thick, we'll shrink it down a little bit so you can, we don't like to have pens for more than probably 10 days to 2 weeks at a time. You try getting it down to a week, because we're trying to balance our real jobs and family. So you try setting it up. So, okay, if we set them up here, they should be good for a week, and then we have to go move them again, is kind of what we target about that size. So it varies from, it could be an acre, it could be 3 acres. So it's all dependent on a lot of factors.
And it's also dependent on, if we've grazed an area before, then the second time going in there too, it's a lot more thinner and reduced too. And then over time, repetitive years as well, we can continue to make the paddocks bigger to meet the same goals, but the timing changes.
So it's not like a certain number of goats per acre. It really is dependent on a lot of these factors, like the available browse that's on the site and so on.
For sure. And you could go a lot more goats. If you wanted to move goats every day, you could put 100 on an acre. People are moving animals with cattle every 12 hours or 24 hours. They have a set time that they move cattle through. They'll even put 250 cows on an acre or whatever to have it done in 4 hours. And then they move them once it gets to a certain height. But for us, once it's defoliated, we move them. We don't move them as fast as that, just for the fact that we don't have that time on our hands.
Yeah, like Greg alluded to, our catchphrase is 40 to 50 goats fit comfortably on our trailer at a time. So that's what we're moving around and balancing, like you said, our real lives and our home lives with that too.
Right, like just a lot of logistics involved. Yeah,
absolutely. I think the word logistics comes up a lot when we talk about this. It's key figuring that out, the proper timing. So,
well, I'm curious about just the goats themselves and what they'll eat, because there are so many things in the woods. Is there things they won't eat, or they eat everything?
So they usually won't eat nettles unless they're at a certain stage. They'll eat them. Like if they're more young and tender, they'll eat them. But if they're pretty tall, they usually don't touch them. Mayaples, Jack in the pulpit, they don't touch that. There's probably a few more things I'm not thinking of.
Yeah, just maybe some things we haven't even identified too that they'll just leave behind.
A lot of ornamental stuff in the woods, like if people in the park specifically, there's residents that butt up to the parks that we've grazed, and some ornamental stuff has gotten away from the houses, and they usually don't touch the ground cover. So
yeah, things like vinca, they don't like vinca. And then some other, like Greg said, some stuff you'd see in maybe like containerized pots that people like hanging baskets and stuff. We've seen lots of that creeping from people's backyards, and the goats, it ends up as a ground cover, and the goats don't like that either. So
yeah, we haven't been too picky on, we walk through the site when we look at it and when we set up the fence, but we're not, like, we don't look through every plant. So if there's something in there that they're probably not supposed to eat, the goats seem to know what's going on. So, because they go through the whole area, and if they don't like something or they can't eat it, they generally don't. They're a lot smarter than we are. So,
What are the species that most landowners are trying to target with the goats? Is there, especially from a forest management standpoint?
Mainly buckthorn, honeysuckle are probably the 2 biggest ones. People want poison ivy too. They have a lot of calls about that. But I would definitely say buckthorn and honeysuckle are probably at the top of the list.
And so they're defoliating those. Are they also eating some of the branches off of that, or the stem on them?
They'll eat the tender ends of them, so sort of prune them a bit, so eat the ends back. And if left in the pen, maybe an extra half a day or so, they will girdle some of those things too. We try not to push them that hard per se, So where they're eating the bark off of things, but it does happen occasionally.
And I suppose there's a limitation, like how high, like, so we've been in woods, where the buckthorn or honeysuckle will be 10, 15 feet tall. How high can they actually get in that stuff to get at it?
Usually about 6 or 7 feet, unless you get the really spindly, like 1-inch diameter buckthorn that's 9 or 10 foot tall. They'll work together and push it over and get it.
Oh.
But generally 6 to 7 feet is probably the average.
Yeah, that's some of the most fun parts of grazing is watching them work together to tip something over, and then they just kind of flock together and swarm it and defoliate it. Once they get down to the end of their pens, that's kind of the classic technique is work together to get the leaves they couldn't reach individually.
Wow. I like it. Teamwork. All right. And I suppose the catch-22 then is if you have some good stuff mixed in, like say you had some good regeneration mixed into that, they're going to eat that too, right?
Yeah, you would need to protect anything that you'd want to save. Most of our sites we're working on, I'd say, are already so far infested that we're kind of starting a redo on the sites.
It sounds like, well, just like anything in forest management, some assessment is necessary in terms of what type of sites they will have the most impact on. And I think, Brooke, you just mentioned maybe you're focusing oftentimes on degraded sites. So are there particular sites or site characteristics that you're working with that goats would be most appropriate for?
Yes, kind of like I alluded to, something that's already, well infested to kind of start over. Grazing actually does a good job. Like Greg said, they can reach 6 to 7 feet on their hind feet. So then they're getting that browse line. And then that makes great access for humans to get in there with chainsaws, brush saws, if you're going to use herbicides. And that's part of the whole process. I know on my own property, that's what we did. We grazed the goats first, and then it had that nice browse line. Then we went in with chainsaws, herbicides, and some of our other clients are doing that too, and then piling those up and perhaps burning them in the winter. And then any resprouts would be, the next year's awesome browse for the goats if they weren't using herbicides, things like that.
I would imagine, thinking too, Greg, about, and maybe asking you guys, that it seems like they would be a natural fit for maybe some of these steeper sites too that we can't get other equipment onto.
Oh, for sure. Because it's not too bad to set up the fence, and the goats can scale the hills or the valleys or all the places you couldn't get equipment. We've grazed along some of the lake shores in Madison that are pretty steep, and we just fence the goats in, and they do their jobs, and we pull them out. So
we've been kind of circling. Greg, here's my Seinfeld reference. So we're looking at our goat-worthy sites. Are there watchouts maybe where you guys would say, oh, maybe this isn't a good thing? Like, is there anything poisonous to them, and places you go, no, we're not going to put goats in here?
So you is probably the worst, I would say.
The ornamental evergreen yew.
Yeah, not you specifically. But
I could be the worst, but
they also say that burdock is poisonous to goats or toxic, but our goats just eat it down to the ground and have no issues. So
we've also been warned about pokeweed, but our goats will eat it. So with no ill effects that we've noticed. So it's kind of like moderation. Maybe dilution is the solution to pollution. Maybe they'll eat a little bit of it, and if it upsets their stomach, maybe they'll stop eating it. And if it doesn't upset them on the next day, and it probably has something to do with, the way the plants, their makeup throughout the summertime too. Maybe it's okay to eat in the spring and not in the fall, or things like that too.
So for poisonous plants wise, I guess we haven't really run into that. More of fencing headaches is probably the biggest thing. Like if you have to go around some obstructions that are pretty difficult to fence. For instance, we had this spillway this summer that was a headache, to say the least. And we set up all the fence, and it got probably 1.5 inches of rain in 30 minutes. And it went from no water in it to whitewater rapids, where you wouldn't even dare to step in it because you would have been in one of the 3 lakes in Madison in 5 minutes.
Other sites we've turned down are very, very small sites. Like if it's less than 1/4 acre, it's just not worth our time to split our herd of 40-ish into a smaller herd. We'd be moving goats by the hours if we did super small sites, or a site that's maybe strictly grasses. They don't prefer that. That's just not effective. We would recommend either mowing or burning something grassy in a site like that. I guess the goats prefer leaves to grassy stems.
Mhm.
So we've turned down jobs that are just not a good fit that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If the landowner can save money by mowing it versus having the goats out there, even though the goats would eat the grass, but it would just be a lot longer because there's a lot higher volume of forage with grasses and forbs versus tree leaves.
Or possibly a site we would turn down too is if the buckthorn is just too large and too tall that the goats can't even reach it and do any good. If there's too shaded in the understory, there's nothing growing there. If it's just, there's nothing for the goats to eat there. It may look green to us, but if they can't reach it, it's obviously not going to be effective.
Yeah. Too big for teamwork, huh?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
It's the saw log buckthorn that
Exactly.
you guys have down south.
So sometimes I think landowners might have questions about, and even foresters might have questions about maybe those impacts of, or maybe unintended impacts of goats on a site. So do you guys ever see any issues with soil compaction or soil disturbance with goats?
I'd say goats are going to be very, very light on the soil and leave less of an impact than maybe some of the larger grazing animals that we're historically used to seeing moving through the woodlots. With a smaller cloven hoof, it's less ground pressure, and anything they leave behind, their manure and stuff, they're helping incorporate with that cloven hoof back into the soils. And any seeds or any ways to spread seed like that, they're ruminants. So their rumens take care of any seeds that are in their system, and they're constantly regurgitating and regrinding them up with their teeth. So they've done studies, and seeds just aren't viable after moving through a goat's digestive tract.
Brooke, something you said really I have a lot of questions about, and that's just kind of that integrated approach to some of this invasive species management you mentioned on your property where you used the goats, and then that allowed access. You came in with cutting and herbicides. And so I guess I just have questions like, what does that process look like if you're going to combine tools out of the toolbox? We know that, this stuff sprouts back, and it's a process to get rid of it and control it. I guess, can you say some more about that and
Sure.
what landowners typically would do?
Absolutely. Yeah, I guess I have the advantage with my real job in forest management to know what's out there for tools. So I've basically thrown everything at ours. Like I said, we started with grazing, went in with a brush saw, chainsaws, did some herbiciding. I've done hand pulling. I've done prescribed burning too in the fall, has been very effective on the smaller resprouts. I've been at this, well, like I said, we had our first goats in 2012. So I'm working on a decade now of kind of managing. And now we're sort of in the maintenance mode where we're getting a lot of seed source at this point. It's not necessarily resprouts. So I guess there's a lot of numbers floating around of how long buckthorn seed can stay viable in the soil. But I guess a classic example, it's at least 10 years on my property that we're getting seed source still back. So right now we're just using them as maintenance. So late spring, it might have been even midsummer by the time we got goats on my own property. It's kind of a luxury to get the goats working on our properties now, as opposed to having on clients' properties. But yeah, so it's just, I'm using all the tools that I can, I guess. And now I'm to the point where we've created some gaps and I am planting seedlings. And so I'm having to protect those seedlings with tree tubes. I've learned I need more than one tree stake to keep the seedlings safe from the goats. I think I woke up the first morning after having the goats in the pen this summer, and probably a third of my tree tubes were tipped over, and I was a little grouchy with the goats. So I'm to the point where my infestation is moved to where I'm moving to the next step and kind of reforesting and creating pockets where it wasn't, trees weren't regenerating naturally in the habitat it was in. So I'm in maintenance mode now and replanting, and then protecting the good stuff.
So the goats are kind of, as you said, one of the tools you would use in that whole process, and maybe they fit into some parts of that process better. I was thinking about your example with the big buckthorn. Like, we've been on sites where we've gone in and we've cut or treated those, and then that seed bank blows up because you have a lot of sunlight. And so maybe in that case, after you did that treatment, that's where the goats might come in or be more useful.
Yep, they came in that second flush after you get the big woody stuff down, and then they're very effective in that bushy part. And that's one of our big things, and one of our bigger clients in the Madison area is getting that second flush. They're coming in with their crews after we're grazing in wintertime, cutting, and then the next spring we're coming back to those same sites and hitting them again twice in the growing season.
So grazing really this is really seasonally dependent then. So like, this wouldn't be a winter thing. This would be like a growing season thing.
Correct. Usually about mid-May, the goats are out on jobs until we shoot for about October 1st is about the time we'll be out till, but this year we're a little mid-September. Just depends on when stuff starts to die, and lose its leaves for the fall, because you're really not gaining anything by having them eat the trees that are losing the leaves because they're frosted. So it varies, but usually October 1st, mid-May to October 1st is pretty good time frame, I would say.
I like that idea. And Greg, you were kind of mentioning, kind of that integration of tools. This is almost like a division of labor too. Like, sometimes that's the worst time to be in there trying to treat things, is during the growing season when you have that. So it offers maybe some opportunity for us to focus on when, if you're using goats, you can focus on those other times of the year for the complementary things to it.
Are there any things you have to watch out for if a landowner was, say, using herbicides to control plus then the goats? I mean, is there some separation there or timing you have to be aware of?
Whatever the label of the herbicide says, usually they have a restriction if it's 30 days or however many days the label says you can't graze. It's usually what we go by. And back to the timing, so we have our goats back home usually beginning of October. Well, we've had some pretty good luck in the winter with buckthorn management, like in the winter pen where the hay feeder is, they'll chew on the bark during the winter and it'll actually top kill it during the winter. Just, we're not gonna go set up fence for other people during that time because it's freezing cold and the ground's froze, but we've had some pretty decent luck with our winter pens in buckthorn management.
Brooke and Greg, it was really interesting talking about these sites that you're putting goats in. I know in my little experience with goats, it's been landowners and actually state property where we've been using them for, say, woodland restoration or savanna type of stuff. Do you use your goats in those types of situations?
We've probably been more so in the woodland setting than the savanna type. Just, there's a lot more forage in the savanna setting. It's just probably not as beneficial to use the goats out there, unless you probably could do it where they would graze all the tree species and then pull them out before they get to the grass and stuff like that. So there's probably some good timing there where if you were to keep it right when they defoliate all the unwanted species, you could pull them out. Otherwise, it's not probably worth it to have the goats graze all the grasses and stuff down.
Yeah, it's kind of like that grass situation you mentioned earlier. It's maybe not the best fit, but yeah, definitely I could see the woodland setting where you're dealing more with the browse. Yeah.
I was just going to say, usually smaller woodlots are more conducive to goat grazing, to kind of only being able to bite off what you can chew type of thing. When I get to, we're usually not grazing on 100-acre sites, I guess. It's usually the smaller woodlots that we're working with.
How hard is it to move that, like when you're working in these woodlots and doing things, how hard is it to move the fencing? It sounds like, oh, it's easy, just put a fence up. But some of the woods I've seen where I would think they'd be goat worthy, it'd be like, man, it'd be a real struggle to get that stuff through.
So we have a brush saw. We usually make a path that's 2 to 3 feet wide, or we go off existing trails. But for Brooke and I, we're pretty pretty fast at setting up fence now. Just, over the years of doing it, you kind of get better at it. We can set up a couple acres in an hour, I would say, if conditions are right. And if we get Brooke's daughters to help, they'll bring fence to us so we can just keep setting it up. But yeah, there's definitely some spots that are quite frustrating to pull the fence through because you get tangled on all the little stobs on the ground or the buckthorn hanging over the trail.
Is this like an electric tape type of fence?
No, it's electric netting is what it's called. So if you see like the white netting, you'll see sheep people have it. If you're driving around the countryside, it's just a white 12 horizontal strands, and then you have the vertical stays that hold it up. But yeah, it's just electric netting essentially.
So it's probably what, like a grid, like how many inches by what, how many inches grid?
12 by, I don't know what the height is. It varies from, it's like 4 or 5 inches, I would say.
So yeah, like 4 by 12 grid. Yeah, netting is the best description, I guess. And then there's fiberglass vertical poles every 14 feet?
12 and a half.
12 and a half feet or so. So those are worked right into the lengths of fence. So you're the numbers guy. How long is it?
It's 164 feet is the fence. So there's like 14 poles and they roll up really nice. So as long as you roll them up properly, you can deploy them pretty quickly. And all the horizontal strands are electrified, except for the one that touches the ground. There's a black string on the ground that is not electrified.
Yeah, for the remote sites, we're using a deep cycle marine battery to energize the fence.
Okay.
And when we have locations and the luxury of actual, an outlet to use, then we'll use actual real power, I guess. But most of the time we're using those marine batteries. They're just isolated sites, woodlot. You don't have a extension cord long enough a lot of times.
Yeah, and the biggest thing is to have a hot fence. The goats will respect it, and they won't really, I shouldn't say they won't get out, but less likely to get out if the fence is hot. Yeah, we've ran solar fencers, but they just don't have, I don't know, maybe we haven't experimented enough with it, but they haven't been able to do what we need. So we just go with a standard energizer with a battery, and we just swap it out every time we move the goats. So if that's a week or so, the battery will last that long.
Is there a size then? Brooke, you mentioned you're mainly looking at maybe smaller parcels, but is there a size where it's just too big to really manage the goats on?
I think it's what you're willing to put in after, I think the average landowner is probably has some limitations to what they're doing. Most of our clients are using that combination of the tools. So if they're simply using goats, then maybe size doesn't matter. If they've got the financial resources, we'd be willing to do it. It just seems we're more focused on, I'd say, what's our biggest site? Probably
11
or 12 acres is the largest sites we've been working on. And like Greg said, we don't necessarily have that all fenced off at the same time, but you can do more with smaller acreages, as we all know, I guess. But if you're using goats as the only tool, then maybe there aren't as many size limitations. You can go bigger.
Yeah.
I don't know. The great answer.
You always, no, that makes total sense. I mean, you always want landowner to bite off a chunk that they can get done and see success on, right? And so if they're following up with follow-up tools, you want them to be able to accomplish those things. So yeah, that makes total sense to me.
So I'm curious too. So I think a lot of foresters are going to be really like, hey, let's think about this. So what would be and just from your kind of experience and again, ballparks, what would this cost for, like, say, in your experience, for on an acre basis or something like that, for a landowner to consider, or for a forester to consider goats?
I would say, looking at a parcel, we try to make sure that most of the targeted species, buckthorn or honeysuckle, are below the 6 to 7 foot tall mark so they can reach the top. I would say that's probably a general rule for looking at that. Cost wise, can't really give you a good answer because we charge per day.
Okay.
It seems to be the most fair versus charging per acre, just for the fact that not every site is the same. Some are way thicker than others. So say Brad has an acre and Greg has an acre, well, Brad's is 8 times as thick. I'm not going to charge him the same price as I'm going to charge Greg because it's not the same. Like Greg's acre might take 2 days to graze where Brad's might take, a week. So we just charge on a per day basis. So it varies. It could be a couple $100 per acre to maybe, a few $100 or even closer to 1,000. It just depends on how thick, how much labor it takes to set up the fence, travel distance, all that stuff factors in.
I like that analogy. Brad's acre is going to be a lot messier than mine. I'm just telling you, Brad.
Well, we do have a Felix and Oscar kind of thing, so I would expect mine to be a little messier than yours. Yeah. So, and maybe another point on that. So I granted these things are going to be very variable. Is there a distance, like you guys can go so far with your goats, but beyond that point, you really can't, and that may affect like availability as well for maybe some people?
Yeah, we don't like to go any further than an hour away from our home base here. It's just not prudent. If you happen to have an escapee or an injured goat or something, it's just not okay to be traveling more than 45 minutes to an hour to go and remedy the problem. And just like we talked about before too, balancing our home lives with this business as well. We try to stick with 1 hour max drive time.
Yeah, and when we first started, we would drive 2 hours to have a job just to kind of get our feet wet on, doing stuff. But now that we've gotten a little bigger, we've toned her down to an hour or less. And we have it set up that the clients check the fencing every day and make sure the goats have water. So, I mean, it's nice for that, but it's still, if we have an issue, like Brooke said, we need to be there. Like if you're crawling in the bed at 9:30 and they call you and say all the goats are out, well, driving a half hour versus 2 hours is a lot better.
So Brooke and Greg, you guys have given us lots of kind of information to frame where we might be using this. Is there anything else you can think of that you would give for advice, particularly to foresters, because that's who is listening here, if they're working with landowners who would like to consider goat grazing? What should they be thinking about and how should they go about it?
I guess really figuring out their objectives. What tools or tool do they want to use? Depending on the size of the buckthorn, if it's 10 to 12 foot tall, you're going to want to probably cut that down. Use herbicide if that's their choice, or if they want to use goats, but depends on the size of the brush or the tree species that they're trying to eliminate. If it's under 6 to 7 feet, you could use the goats. Even if the thing is, if they're a little taller than that and they can't reach the top, we've found that the buckthorn will just grow above that. So, if they can't reach the top of that tree, it's not probably beneficial for them to use goats.
I would say kind of keep an open mind too, because I guess historically grazing has been a very bad thing in the forestry world. This is limited, this is targeted grazing, this is temporary. We're moving them in and out and moving the paddocks every several days to a week. We're not fencing them in for the whole year. And like I said, if they get bored or they run out of food, then they start girdling, which I think was part of the problem, with livestock in the woods month after month. Could be the girdling, or could be the, brushing up against the desirable tree species and affecting form and quality, things like that. This is a temporary movement, temporary grazing. So it's definitely lighter on the land than historic grazing in the forestry world, I guess.
It's fascinating to me, Brooke. We started, I think, about the same time, but I remember the oldest plans I would find in files were basically like the foresters back in the day would say 2 things: don't burn this woods and don't graze it. And now it seems like we've turned the corner and we're like, well, we can use fire as a tool, and now we can use grazing. So we just have to be innovative.
Yeah, we're opening the doors to some non-traditional methods of management, and it's a good thing. I think a little bit of everything can be used on almost all properties.
Yeah, it's definitely a good tool for the toolbox to use goats. We always tell all the people that it's not a one-time, they're going to fix every problem in one time. It's going to be over time, but if we keep on it, they're going to do what you want them to do.
Yeah. We always try to have realistic expectations too, and be very transparent that one time of grazing is not going to be the magic wand, and it's not going to eradicate all of the buckthorn on their property with one treatment. And I hope people would understand that, I guess, with any type of management, our invasive species are resilient, and sometimes we have to hit them a couple different times and different directions and different assassins per se.
There's a reason why they're invasive. They figured out ways to survive in all sorts of conditions.
Yeah. I mean, it's like so many things. You got to be persistent and realize it's a process to get this done. It's not like instant results.
Which is hard in today's world, because that's how a lot of people live.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. And there's just so many things in forestry that we're, trying to explain. This is going to take a while. So, Brooke and Greg, I just want to thank you. I really have a much better understanding, which is I started with nothing pretty much. So, but now I have a much better understanding, I think, of the situations where I might consider the use of goats, how I might integrate them with other methods, and just assess the site and site conditions. So I really appreciate that. And I think foresters are going to walk away with having that better understanding too. So really thank you for that.
I really appreciate people and willing to innovate and try something different. And Brooke, I know you and I have been around for a while, and I remember the old plans that you would read. They would say, don't burn this woods, don't graze this woods. And if you protected it, life was good. And now we're seeing that whole thing change. And so you guys you're innovators. And so I really appreciate that. And I love what you guys are doing.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to share our part-time, full-time job in the summer. It's definitely a passion that we have, and we like to talk about it. So thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you.
Great. Thanks for coming.
Yep. Thanks a lot.
Well, I don't know about you, Brad, but I learned a lot today.
I did too. All right, get ready for this. In prepping for this episode, I found a wealth of goat jokes.
Oh, geez.
So you're going to love these. Okay, you ready? Okay.
Do I have to?
You have to. What do you get when you ask a goat to DJ at your party?
I have no idea.
A sick bleat. Get it? A sick bleat. All right. All right. Wait. Okay, I got another one.
Get down with this sick bleat.
Get down with this sick bleat. Okay. Wait. Okay. Here's another one. What did the goat munching on a DVD say?
I have no idea.
I thought the book was better. Yeah. See, that's gold. That's gold. I tell you, gold.
No, it's not.
Yeah. In any event, thanks for listening to today's episode of Silvacast. If you have ideas for future episodes or questions for the Dropbox, we didn't have anything in the Dropbox this week, right, Greg?
No, unfortunately not.
But if you do, please let us know. We learn best when we wrestle with questions, so keep them coming.
Take care, everyone. And as always, thanks to our team, Megan Espy, our editor-in-chief, Noah LeMade, IT master, theme music by Paul Frater, and of course, UW Stevens Point's Wisconsin Forestry Center.